Okay, so I have taken the time to do some reading, and as I start doing more and more of these video commentary of sorts, you'll find that I have varying opinions on different things. My last video was confronting Joshua Feuerstein on his challenge to disprove God. In this video, I am going to address something that really bothers me, and that's our perception of our economy. So Ron Paul on his Facebook page recently wrote this: a State of the Union preview. The president's tax plan will make the poor poorer, by Ron Paul. In tonight's State of the Union message, he says, the president will tell the American people that the rich should be taxed more to help the middle class. To do this, President Obama will raise inheritance and capital gains taxes. But in the free market, this is where investment money comes from. His tax plan will destroy capital, this lifeblood of the free market. By reducing capital savings, the president will place additional pressure on the Fed to create capital out of thin air. That means the Fed will accelerate the virtual printing presses and thus reduce the value of the dollar for everyone. The politicians love this approach because they will then claim responsibility along with the Fed to distribute all of the newly created dollars. In the process, the market rate of interest is eliminated, which is the source of main investment and bubbles. Ironically, the president's plan will actually worsen the problem of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. When the purchasing power of the dollar is reduced by too many Fed-created dollars flooding the market, the poor are hit much harder. If the president gets his way, his tax plan will only make the economic problems much worse. Unfortunately, long ago, I discovered that economic knowledge is rare commodity in Washington, D.C. The irony here, people, is that he has no economic understanding whatsoever of how money is created in our economy by the Fed, or the main cause of inflation. So, the first question you have to ask yourselves is money a commodity? The rich like to treat it as a commodity. They hoard it. They stuff it in their bank accounts, they invest it in their own personal companies, or they stick them in tax havens that are like the Cayman Islands outside the United States so that their money is secure. But as they do that, they take the money out of the economy and they stop it from doing what it's supposed to do, which is do work. Money is a tool of exchange. That's what it's there for. We value certain things like our time, our energy, our work at a given value. And then we get paid when we, submit that time and energy to a company, our employer, and then we turn around and trade that money, which is really our time, our energy, our life, for objects and things that we need. Food, water, rent, entertainment, stuff like that. That's money doing doing the work of a tool. That's what it's there for. It's doing work. When money is hoarded in a bank account and it's sitting there doing nothing, it causes inflation. Because the money's not in the economy, the Fed has to create more money to replace that money to do the work that money was supposed to do. One of the reasons why trickle-down economics does not work is because the money that is supposed to be coming down from the top in trickle-down economics isn't actually doing that. It sits there. This is only expounded by and causes a greater issue by the way that money is also created outside of the Fed. You see, the Fed creates X amount of dollars based on bonds, which are then loaned out. That's how we get debt. Essentially, we loan our value of our dollar to other countries like China. And that value then gets translated into a wager against the dollar. That dollar and that money is then sent out to different banks which have requested a certain amount of cash. And then what the banks do with their loans, like mortgages and the like, is they don't actually give away money. They leverage the value of your credit against the money that they hold in their stores. And so instead of just doing a one-for-one, which arguably is okay, they'll leverage that amount of money in the store multiple times. So let's say you have a bank. The bank has $100,000 in its stores. Well, it can leverage, by law, up to 15 times that amount, according to the federal guidelines for mortgages, before they have to request more money to be stored to leverage again. So essentially, when they go and pay your loan to a company, let's say a mortgage broker, so that you can buy a house, they are leveraging your payback on that money. And they do that 15 times. So instead of having $100,000, they're pretending that they have something like $1.5 million. That is virtual money, and that causes inflation because it's creating money out of thin air and dumping it into the economy and so on. But the biggest cause of inflation is really the money that's being stored, because who's getting that money that you're paying back virtually? That's the super rich, the people that own the brokers, own the mortgage lenders, the people that can take that money that's been virtually created and stuff it into their pockets. By taxing the capital gains and inheritance, you're only affecting really the maybe top 10% of earners in this country. The vast majority of our billionaires in this country are not self-made. They inherited their money. We're talking about people like the Waltons, the Koch brothers, people who didn't do the work, didn't put the time in, but got all the reward. They basically got the genetic lottery of winning money from their family. These people push and strive to take money out of the economy, take money away from the taxpayers in any way they can, which damages our economy, damages our chances of getting ahead. They constantly push for legislation that damages any upward mobility because they don't want to share that wealth. And they know that upward mobility, changes in our minimum wage, changes in union rights, all these things that the normal workers, the 99% of workers, the 90% of workers want and do, damages their chances of maintaining their power, which is monetary power, it's economic power. That's why we have huge lobbyists from the Koch brothers, from their various subsidiaries. That's why we have huge and different people and groups of people that are lobbying for the Waltons and the oil companies and oil barons. It's because they want to keep their funds, and they want to keep their money. And it's understandable. Okay, it's understandable that they want to keep their money, and in a certain sense, they have earned it. But that earning of that money is a play off our economy, and it's not real work. The whole entire argument that capital gains is where the money comes from for the free market, that's the lifeblood of the free market, that's not true. The free market is an operable system for exchange, and that's it. It allows for the free exchange of product. And that exchange of product, be it personal services, working services, working for a company, buying different things like food and water and shelter and clothing, etc., 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 is all done through a tool which we call currency, money. We cannot allow the super rich to maintain the money that they have and the power that they garner from that money, because it is consistently used against the American people. There's a reason why they argue against things like, free socialist education, why they are trying to push for privatization of Social Security, privatization of Medicare, privatization of all these different things, because they can gain money from it. They don't gain money from social structures of which have the bargaining power to get the lowest possible cost and value. So when Ron Paul says that it's going to hurt the poor and make the poor poorer, he doesn't understand that by removing the money that is in control of the super rich and putting it back into the economy, we're reducing in the inflation rate. We're reducing the lost value of the dollar. And that means a gain in buying power by the dollar. By removing the hoarded money and repurposing it using it as a tool like it's supposed to be, we affect the value of the dollar. And we can use that to reduce our debt, reduce the deficit, and change our spending. The greater issue here, though, is not just inflation, though. It's how we view our economic structure. If we go back to 1940s, right after the Great Depression, taxes were massive for the super rich, upwards of 80 and 90%. And it kind of depended on each state, obviously. It was a combination of federal and state taxes, but nonetheless, 80-90% of their income was paid into back to the government, and back to the taxable people, the taxpayers. And the rich still lived effectively. They had huge houses, and they had multiple cars, and they had the luxuries, but the poorer people were still making more. Go back to 1960. 1963, the minimum wage was $3.76 an hour. But compare that to the inflated rate. If we adjust that for inflation, that was closer to $13 an hour in today's money. Yet we are now working at $7.25 an hour federal base minimum wage. And unfortunately, that is below the living standard, because the living standard inflates just as the dollar does. And so while it appears numerically to be higher than the past value, with inflation accounted for, the living standard is way higher than what we're being paid for at the minimum level. At $7.25 an hour, if we were to adjust that backwards for inflation to what would be valued in 1963, it's closer to $1 an hour. The issue that we're seeing here is that inflation is affecting everybody, and by reducing inflation, by removing the hoarded money again, the money that's in the bank accounts of these super rich people, and putting it back to work, we decrease that inflation. We bring the dollar closer to what it was in value 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, by doing so. Inflation is all about the actual number of virtual dollars that exist in our economy versus the value of what we have as a true commodity, which is bet against. And that's the gold that we have in Fort Knox, and that's other commodities of great value. So in short, Ron Paul's position is ironically the position that has caused the greatest amount of inflation. He wants to limit capital gains taxes, and that has led to many loopholes in our tax code, which allow for companies to take more from the taxpayers than what they're paying into it. Several different companies, including the Waltons, paid a negative tax, which means they got more money back from our government and from the taxpayers than what they paid into the tax structure and the tax coffers. And that's even more problematic because it's on top of all the other things that they do to get around government regulations. The Waltons, for example, if you look at the amount of money that they get because their employees are living off of welfare structures, SNAP and whatever else, they're getting upwards of $50 billion a year just in revenue that's being spent in their stores by their employees to get groceries, because the employees can't afford with the SNAP program to go anywhere else to spend that money. It's cheaper to go buy the food from Walmart. The entire structure that these companies have set up has been designed to game our governing system. Now, let's look at the economic structure a little bit here. The economic structure that we have right now is not actually a free market. A free market means that anybody can enter the market, anybody can leave the market, anybody can create their own products and sell those products. In reality, that's not possible because we have controls that block that from happening. The regulations that we have governing copyright, governing trademark, governing patents all prevent a truly free market. Instead, we have a structured market The structured market allows for companies to sell products through advertisement, sell services through advertisement, and those are all regulated. Regulation is good. It maintains quality usually. It maintains safety. It maintains, the rights to own certain things that help people. They allows them, to claim, this product is mine. I designed it. I invented it. I'm the one that licensed it. I get paid for my work. Okay. Unfortunately, the way that the system is structured, it's gamed so that companies can steal that stuff. A great example of this is there are certain rules in different states that don't allow microbreweries to sell directly to their customers. They have to license their invented beer at no cost to major breweries. And while their name might get out there, they aren't getting paid. Now, this is a good example. And this comes down to tax code, regulations, localized regulations, state regulations, and limitations on the free market. The biggest issue, though, is our expenditure. While the free market, and particularly structured market, has regulations, it has a great advantage in allowing people to expand and explore their ideas, their abilities. On the flip side, unfortunately, our economy is driven mostly by political gains and political motives, not the market itself. We can see this by how we spend in our discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is a certain amount of money that's taken out of our gross domestic product, which is basically the amount of money that we make before we pay off what we owe to other countries. Usually this is a limited amount, but it has exponentially grown under GOP control and deregulation of taxes, because as fewer taxes are being paid, as more loopholes allow companies and the super rich to take advantage and take money out of the taxpayer pockets, it puts heavier pressure on the middle class and lower middle class and the impoverished to take up that slack. And what ends up happening is that more and more people have to utilize the welfare systems that exist, and in turn, they get blamed for the economic woes and ills, while the real blame lies with the super rich. By reducing our economic burden through domestic spending, realistically, we can reduce the burden on the taxpayers. But they don't want to do that. The GOP doesn't want us to do that. And why? Because it takes away their money machine. And you can see that they do this through how they attack domestic spending that's welfare-based. They want to remove funding for schools. They want to remove Social Security. They want to remove the health care bill. They want to make it so that there are no more national parks. They want to do all these different things that damage our infrastructure. They want to make it so there is no USPS anymore. They attack the small things that make up 20, maybe 30% of the actual discretionary spending. And they want to bolster the one thing that's in our economy, in our discretionary spending bills that cost the most, and that's the military, because most of their contracts for the companies that they own or are getting kickbacks from or have their own stock in are military-based contracts. If we are to save our economy and make it function properly, we need to reduce the discretionary spending in the military. We spent something like $1.3 billion on a plane that the military didn't want, that doesn't even fly. Talk about a waste of money. The GOP talks about pork spending. Well, there's a great example which the GOP forced on the military in the first place. We need to cut spending like that. We need to logically approach how we utilize the discretionary spending. Reducing the entire discretionary spending by 30 to 40% will reduce our entire dependency on debt and deficit spending. Shifting the money from the military and refining the military and making it more efficient rather than just bloating it making bloatware, if you will, for the military. We need to turn that money and put it back into education, put it back into the economy, back into infrastructure, back into green technologies, so that we can have a functional future for this country. Thanks for listening. This is Chris Martin, out.